Sponsoring a 2023 Bahamas cruise open to all educators. Guests such as spouses, family, and friends are also welcome to attend. There is an amazing lineup of speakers, and you can book your PD at sea now by putting down a $200 deposit. Attend the Sail Away Party Thursday, July 6th in Port Canaveral at 6 p.m. in preparation for Cruising Friday. You will return Monday, July 10th at 8 a.m. Scan the QR code now to sign up. You don't want to miss it.
Hey, I am super excited to be back with you all tonight. I'm Erica Terry from Healthy with the Educators, hosting season 3 of the TeacherGoals podcast. We have a phenomenal guest with us tonight, Malia Hollowell from Play-Doh to Play-Doh. And if you have not already done so, I want to know who you are. Who do we have with us tonight? What do you do in education? We are so excited that you all are hanging out with us tonight. I don't know if you saw, but we have a lot of exciting guests this season. And so we're going to be coming to you every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a great lineup planned for you this season. And so I'm super excited about it. I'm super pumped about the Teacher Heart Out Cruise next year that TeacherGoals is going to be sponsoring, co-sponsoring. And so we're all super excited about that. We showed a little commercial at the beginning. I'll probably end with that commercial. And so once again, if you haven't already done so, tell us who you are, what you do. I want to say hello to Rihanna Rodriguez. We have Keisha from Chicago. We have Hillary, who is a para from a 5th grade para. So welcome all of you. We have Nicole from Atlanta, who is a pre-K teacher. And so we want to thank you all for joining us. And I am going to just give you, just in case this is your first time here, I am going to just give you a quick little overview of how we roll on Thursday evenings. I'm going to bring the guest up, go through a few questions. Tonight, we're going to be digging into the science of reading and how you can implement those strategies in your classroom. At the end of the interview, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions. So as we're interviewing, if you think of questions that you want to know, go ahead and put them in a chat and I will be sure to address them. Or you can hold on to your questions until the very end. But Malia will be answering your questions tonight. So definitely make sure you put your questions in the chat. I am going to bring her up in a minute. I just want to say thank you all for joining us. We have Tanisha from Jamaica. We have Carol, who's in adult education in Tennessee. Karina, who's a teacher from New Zealand. I love that the TeacherGoals audience is just worldwide. This is fantastic. We have Keisha, who is director at a daycare and a soon-to-be business owner. Congratulations on that. We have Jennifer from Jamestown, New York, who is a para. So welcome, 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 everyone. And so I am not going to hold you guys long tonight. I'm actually going to bring up Malia Hollowell from Play-Doh to Play-Doh right now. Let's get this party started. Hello, how are you?
I am so great. I'm so excited to get to chat about the science of reading with you tonight.
Yes, and we are so excited to have you on. We're going to be talking science of reading. We're going to be talking future publications, plus a whole lot more. And so before we dive into these strategies and really dig into literacy and how to improve reading, I want to learn about you. For people that may not know you, may not have heard of Play-Doh to Play-Doh, let us know, who are you? How did you get into education and how did you start such a phenomenal brand?
Well, my name is Malia Hollowell, and I'm a national board certified teacher. And as you mentioned, I founded a site called Play-Doh to Play-Doh about 11 years ago. I was actually on maternity leave with our second son, and I was really missing being back in the classroom. I was missing my kindergarten students. And so on a whim, I thought, you know what, I'm going to start sharing some of the activities that I'm doing with my 3-year-old, some of the alphabet games, some of the math activities, and just put them out in the blogosphere. Blogging was big back then. It was really trendy. So I jumped on the blog train, and pretty soon I had teachers reaching out asking me if I could turn these activities into printables that they could easily print off and use in their classroom and make 25 copies of right there. So I taught myself how to create printables, and one thing led to another. And now all these years later, I have a reading course that I teach teachers how to actually implement reading instruction in their classroom. Play-Doh to Play-Doh has become its own world where we're creating teaching tools constantly. So it's become definitely a full-time gig.
Definitely a full-time gig. It's like you were, a blogger, almost like you were Teachers Pay Teachers before Teachers Pay Teachers, right?
Exactly.
And so, yes. So tell us, like you said, you were on maternity leave. You were missing your students, missing those interactions. So kind of share with us your story in education. Like what happened that made you say, you know what, I'm going to start creating these resources. Like I know you were missing people, but it's one thing to miss. It's another thing to create just a whole brand dedicated to these structures. So kind of share with us your story, your background.
Well, my story started back in 2003. I stepped into the classroom for the very first time, and I was so excited to hit the ground running. But I realized in those first couple of years that teaching was harder than I expected. There were
Yes.
so many things. There were so many other things that I just hadn't anticipated. Faculty meetings after school, doing report cards really effectively, constantly gathering data about my students to make sure that I could differentiate for them. So teaching was a lot, and I felt like I finally started to get my groove around year 3 or 4. It did definitely take me a while. And so when I stepped out of the classroom for my maternity leave and had teachers reaching out and asking me to create these resources, I realized, you know what? I know exactly the path that they are walking right now, and I want to lighten their load and make their life easier. And this is such a great, it's fun for me. It's such a great way for me to give back to the world. And so I just dove in feet first. And for me, the most important thing is making sure that I'm current on research, because so often the day-to-day reality of teaching is that there are not a lot of extra hours left for teachers to read professional development books or listen to teacher podcasts. And so I really see it as my job to lighten that load, do the work, then deliver it in a really easy to understand and really easy to implement way.
I love that, because you hit on so many things. Like, I think every teacher that's on right now could definitely agree with you that when you first get started, you're like, yeah, I'm going to have this. And you start and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't know it was so much other stuff to do. So to hear that you have made it your mission to really decrease the load for teachers by doing some of that work for them and giving it to them in very easy to understand resources and tools that you provide. And so we are going to get a lot of that tonight, because we're going to dive right into talking about the science of reading and really digging into those specific strategies that you found to be most effective. So before we get into the strategies, kind of break it down. Like, what is the science of reading for someone like me with a high school science teacher background, been in administration for years? What's the science of reading?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I have to admit that the first time I heard that term, science of reading, I started Googling for a book called The Science of Reading, or for a curriculum. I felt like there had to be some book that I could grab and just digest and walk away having read The Science of Reading. But what I realized very quickly is that the science of reading is really just a big umbrella term, kind of like biology. So you can't grab a biology book and know all the biology things, right? The science of reading is 5 decades of research that has been collected by educational experts, so educational researchers, but also brain researchers and speech pathologists and social workers. So many different experts from so many different areas have been coming together and contributing all of the research and the case studies that they've completed into this thing called the science of reading. And if you were to take all of that information and put it in one spot, I like to imagine it like a giant warehouse filled with stacks and stacks of journal articles and case studies and brain scans and all the things. It would just go on for days, right?
Yeah.
So that is what the science of reading is. It is not a book. It is not another pendulum swing. We've heard about education swinging back and forth from one recommended approach to another. It's not a pendulum swing. You cannot argue with it. It just is science.
All right. And so I love the whole analogy of the pendulum, because it is here to stay. It's not swinging from side to side, which is why it's so important for us to make sure that we have those specific strategies that we can use. So an administrator comes to a teacher and is like, we're doing the science of reading this year. And, the teacher's looking like, what? And so kind of walk us through, like, what are, some of the strategies that you found to be most effective, or where should someone start if they're just beginning to implement the science of reading into their classroom?
I love this question because this is probably the number one question I get asked by teachers because it's hard to know where to begin. You don't know if you should grab a science of reading book or take a training. There are really 3 specific tweaks that I recommend every teacher makes right away, because once you see the impact that these small little changes in your teaching can have on students' reading growth, you're going to be extremely motivated and excited to make even more changes in your classroom, simply because the impact is so significant. So, number 1, start teaching phonological awareness every single day. We used to think of phonological awareness, which is a big bucket that includes things like rhyming and breaking words into syllables like elephant. So we used to think of all of those skills, those phonological awareness skills, as pre-K and kindergarten skills. But what the science has actually shown us is that students actually need to practice those skills every day, all the way up through 5th grade. So if you are an intermediate teacher, so you teach 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, you might have students in your class who are really struggling with reading. You've tried everything in your toolkit and still nothing is working. Well, what you might actually find is that they don't need to work on more advanced reading skills. What actually is happening is they have holes in these very foundational, basic beginning level skills called phonological awareness. They're not able to rhyme. They're not able to hear the individual sounds in a word like cat, at. So as teachers, we can help fill these holes by simply practicing phonological awareness every single day, all the way up through 5th grade. So that's number 1. Number 2 is making sure to explicitly teach phonics skills. When I started teaching back in 2003, all the rage was to get good books in kids' hands and have them figure out how to read on their own. We kind of thought that reading was something that they would pick up naturally, and that they would be able to connect the dots on their own just by having time to practice it. But the research has actually shown us that is not true. Only 10% of kids will be able to, quote unquote, naturally learn how to read. For all of the other kids that are in your classroom, they're going to need you to connect those dots for them. They're going to need you to show them the letter B and tell them that that letter B makes the B sound in bat and ball and all the other B words, right? So make sure to teach phonics lessons and be really clear that we are connecting a letter or a letter combination with a specific sound. So that's number 2. And then finally, number 3 is swap out your sight word flashcards and word walls for sound mapping. So again, back in 2003, I would give all of my kiddos piles of sight word flashcards every week, and they would go through and they would look at those cards 5,000 times throughout the week, and I would cross my fingers on Friday and hope that they'd memorize them. The reason that it took so many exposures is because we now know, based on research, that students do not learn how to read based on visual memory. The way that they're actually learning how to read is by sound. So what we want to do is take a word like cat and have kids hear the sounds in that word, k, at, and then connect those sounds to the letters they need to spell them. So the k is spelled with the C, the a is spelled with an A, and the t is spelled with a T. Suddenly, when they have connected each of those sounds that they hear to the letters that are used to spell them, it's like a door has been unlocked for them, and they'll be able to memorize that word in just 4 or 5 exposures. So think about that for just a second. It gives me goosebumps. This is the reason why I get so excited about the science of reading, because think about, as a teacher, if you used to have kids look at a word 500 times in order for them to remember it, and now you can have them memorize it in just 5 times, how powerful, how much easier is it for them to be able to learn?
Yes. Love that. So just to recap for someone that may have come in right now, you have given us 3 tweaks that we can make if we're just starting off with implementing these strategies for the science of reading. And so the first one was to teach phonological awareness every day. Number 2 was to explicitly teach phonics skills. And then number 3 was to swap out sight words and flashcards for sound mapping. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
got them.
Yes, I love, love, love it. And so, when teachers are starting with these strategies, like they sound so simple, so like, okay, I can do that. But one thing that I've learned, I'm sure you've encountered, is that with every good strategy, there always comes some challenge, right? So when teachers are implementing the science of reading, what are some of the challenges that they tend to face? And most importantly, what can they do to overcome them?
So I'm going to give you 2. The
Okay.
first one is really the very first hurdle that I've heard a lot of teachers share with me as they start to dive into this, and that is teacher guilt. So a lot of teachers feel shame, guilt, sadness that for all of these years that they were in the classroom, prior to learning about the science of reading, they were using strategies that they now know were ineffective. So they worry that they failed their kids. They worry that they were failing as a teacher. For that challenge, the best piece of advice I can give you is to let go of the shame and guilt. We all were doing the very best we possibly could do with the training and the tools that we were handed. We were using curriculum that was not based on the science of reading. So school districts were buying curriculum and putting it in classrooms, and nobody along the way understood that this was not effective teaching for kids. So we have to move on. We cannot get stuck in the guilt and shame behind past practices. We just, now that we know better, let's do better. So that's number 1. And then the second challenge that I hear a lot of teachers talk about is that they have a hard time getting support from their administrators. So their principals might not be behind the science of reading. So they're excited about it, but their admin is not. So what are they supposed to do in that case? And the best piece of advice I can say in that situation is to start implementing a couple of these little tweaks like the ones that I just mentioned, and be the example. Because once you can come to your admin and say, these were my reading growth scores last year. Yes. I've now implemented this change, and look at how much more significant growth I'm getting for my students. I am so excited about this. I'm excited to share this with my team. Can we be a pilot grade for implementing more science of reading strategies? It's hard to argue against data.
Yes, yes. And that was the first thing that I thought of, because the data just always, like, if you want to convince someone that the strategies that you're using are working, it's the numbers don't lie. So data is always a great tool to lean on. And so for someone that has listened tonight and they're just like, okay, I've been using sight words, and now she's telling me that with sound mapping, my students can learn these words in 4 exposures versus 100. And so I'm like, okay, I am ready to get started. I'm ready to go all in with the science of reading. What is one action that, someone that's gung-ho, ready to start, that they can implement tomorrow?
I always love starting with sound mapping because it's one of those strategies that we can use in pre-K all the way up through high school. We all have students, and even as fluent readers, we come across words that we may not know how to spell. Mm-hmm. And sound mapping is such a great strategy because it helps put those pieces in place so we can figure out how to spell and read a word. So to do it, we're going to tap the sounds we hear. Then we're going to map the sounds we hear, graph the sounds we hear, write the word, and read it. So I'm going to say that again. So it's tap it, map it, graph it, write it, and read it. And if you're watching this on the live stream, I'm going to hold this up for you so you can kind of watch me. But if you're listening to the podcast, obviously you'll be able to just hear me saying it. So the first thing we're going to do is tap the sounds. And let's use the word bat for this, okay? So we're going to tap the sounds b, at. You can just tap it against the table or your hand. B, at. Now we're going to map the sound. So we can put a little manipulative or something here so we can actually help kids start to recognize that each of those sounds they're saying represent something. They're not quite sure what it represents yet, but we just really want to hone in on that sound. So we can take little counting chips and we'll put them in each of these boxes. So b, at, t. Now we're going to write or graph the sounds, which means writing the sounds that we hear. So we want to connect that sound to the letters. So the first sound was b, now we have a, and now we have t. We're going to write the word, the whole complete word, bat, down at the bottom, and then we're going to read it, bat. So we tapped it, we mapped it, we graphed it, wrote it, and read it. And now that's one time. We just repeat it 4 more times, and it should be logged into our brains.
Love it. And I love that visual example. That was so awesome for people that are visual learners. And so the tool that you were using, I'm just curious, like, is that available somewhere or,
Yes.
Okay.
So again, helping teachers is my number one goal.
Yes.
This is actually a freebie. So I put
Okay.
it off so you can see, yep, just go to Play-Doh and type in sound map and it will pop right up for you.
I love it. So we will make sure that we include that link as well on the show notes. And so any final words of wisdom for, someone that is new, maybe this is their first time really getting some practical strategies that they can use for the science of reading. Any final words of wisdom?
For me, I keep going back to the why behind this. The reason that I am so excited and so passionate about spreading the word about the science of reading is really because of the impact it has on student growth. Right now, the current reality is that our data shows us 65% of 4th graders are reading below grade level. And the data shows us that when we use science of reading strategies, we can actually get 95% of kids reading by the end of 1st grade. So think about the difference in those numbers. We can keep doing what we've been doing all along. And by the time kids get to 4th grade, we know a majority of them are still going to be below where we need them to be. Mm-hmm. Or we can use these other strategies and we can get 95% of our kids reading by the end of 1st grade. It's such an amazing opportunity for us as educators. And the great news is it can be really easy to implement. You just have to have great resources that make it easy for you to do just that.
Yes, and you have given us some great resources tonight, so we appreciate it. There are so many questions that we have, but before we get to the questions, if people want to learn more about you, more about Play-Doh to Play-Doh, where can they find you?
So you can find me online at Play-Doh2Play-Doh.com. I'm on Instagram at Play-Doh 2 Play-Doh as well. And if you want to dive feet first into the science of reading, I'm going to have a book coming out in March. So I'm really excited about that. And I have a 4-week course called the Reading Roadmap that you are invited to join as well.
Love it. And so, yes, we are going to have to get you back on in March when that book comes out so that we can learn more about it. So definitely keep us posted on that. And I just want to thank you for joining us. I learned so much about the science of reading and I love the strategies and visual aid that you shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we are now going to jump right into our Q&A. And so we do have some questions that have come up, but if you have a question right now is a great time to go ahead and put it in the chat. And I'm going to just start with some of the questions that we have. So the first one was about sound mapping. It was from Melinda, and it says, how does sound mapping for high frequency words like the and said, or how would you sound map for high frequency words like the and said?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this in 2 different parts. So first of all, I want to give you another little tip. This is a teaching tip. If you think about high frequency word lists like dolch and fry, which are the high frequency, that's hard for me to say today. Those are the word lists that most school districts use. They've been around forever. It's just been the way that we've always taught sight words. Those lists are organized by the frequency, right? That's why they're called high frequency. So I like to imagine Dr. Dolch and Dr. Fry sitting with a gigantic stack of books and tallying how many times they found the word the in those books and how many times they found the word said in those books. And they took all of the words that had the most tallies and they put them up at the top of the list, and then they kept going down and came up with this list of words organized by frequency. Here's the problem. When you have that list and you're now teaching it to your students, most of us would start at number 1 and combine number 1, 2, and 3 on the list. And those are the words we would focus on week 1. Week 2, we would move on to the next words on the list. Well, when you're doing that, you're actually focusing on very different phonics skills. The word the, for example, has a digraph. It has TH, and then it has a lazy schwa sound after that. So if you're a fluent reader and you're having to teach the digraph TH, the lazy schwa, then you have the next word on the list is and now you have to focus on a short a sound and the n, d at the end. You suddenly are teaching 6 or 7 different phonics skills in 1 week. And as a teacher, that would be really daunting and overwhelming. But now put yourself in your students' shoes.
Right.
They are suddenly having to memorize all of those skills at once. So instead of teaching it in the order that they were given, sort your high frequency word lists by phonics skill. Put all of your short A words together. Put all of your short O words together. And now all of a sudden, you're still teaching the same 100 words you have to teach, but now you do not have to teach 7 different skills in 1 week, and your students don't have to learn 7 different skills. Okay, so that's number 1. That was a bonus, but now I'm going to show you really quickly how to teach this, how to map this one word. So let's do the, okay? And we're going to first.
I'm going to pause you right there. I'm going to try to remove myself so that they can see you and see the visual better. So I'm going to try to remove myself.
Okay, so we're going to look at this sound map, okay? And the very first thing we want to do when we are sound mapping is we want to close our eyes. This helps me because it can be so tempting as a fluent reader to focus on the actual letters that we know exist in a word, but we really want to focus on the sounds, okay? So if you need to, you can close your eyes with me, and we're going to listen for the sounds we hear in the. So th, there are 2 sounds. Yes, we know as fluent readers that there are actually 3 letters, but we're not focused on letters. We're only listening for sounds. So, okay, so we're going to tap it. Now we're going to map it. We're going to take little counting chips or little counting bears, anything. You can really use beans, coins, rocks, anything. We're going to put them in each sound box. Okay, now we're going to graph it. We're going to write it. So we tapped it, we mapped it. Now we're going to write it. Now listen, we have 1 sound box here, but we have 2 letters because we know 2 letters are going to make that 1 sound. So we're going to put both of those letters in this box. And then we're going to put the okay? Now we know as fluent readers that there is an E in this box. So we would put an E, but most likely if you are working with pre-K or kindergarten students, they're not going to put an E here. They're going to put a U. Right? Or some other letter right here, because the sound does not, it could be spelled by any of the vowels. So if they put a U or they make a mistake, you can just say, you know what? It does sound like it could be an sound, but in this case, we are actually going to need a different letter. We actually need an E here instead. And we know that our brain's going to need a little bit of extra help remembering that it's an E and not a U. So let's put a little heart here, and that'll remind us that we need to remember by heart that the is spelled with an E at the end. Okay, so we gave a little story behind it. We had them put a heart there so they can remember it. Now we're going to have them write it and then read it, the. Okay, so that was the. I'm going to do one more really fast since you asked about said. We're going to do the same steps again. Tap it, map it, graph it, write it, and read it. So tap. We're going to tap the said. S, e, d. We're going to map it by putting the manipulatives in here. S, e, d. Now we're going to graph it. We're going to map or attach the letters that we need for each of those sounds. S, e, d. Okay, now that middle box right here, that middle sound, we know as fluent readers and writers that there is an AI that's used to spell that sound. Most brand new readers are not going to know that. They're going to think that it is an E because most of the time, would be spelled with an E, right? So they're going to put it like this. So we're just going to simply calmly say, you are right. It does make the S sound, and E makes the S sound a lot of times. But in this case, for this word, we actually want to replace that with the letters A, I. And we want to help our brain remember that we spell it with AI by putting a little heart here. So we can remember by heart that said is spelled with an AI in the middle. Now let's go ahead and write it down below, said, and then we can read it, said. So there you go. You got a bonus tip you did not ask for, and then we sound mapped the and said.
Awesome. Awesome. So that was a great answer. We had some love in the chat. Thank you for this wonderful and helpful session. So thank you for definitely showing as well as teaching us how we could teach those high frequency words. So that was amazing. So now our next question is from Janae, who says, would it not be wise to use a combination of sound mapping and sight words?
Okay, so this, Janae, I'm glad you asked this question too, because sight words can mean different things for different people. When I first started teaching back in 2003, I would talk about sight words as those high frequency words we wanted students to memorize by sight. When you talk to a science of reading expert or a brain scientist, they're going to use the word sight words differently. They're actually going to call sight words words that have already been memorized so that people know the words by sight. And the reason it's important to know the difference is because the way that I used to use the word sight words was kind of hopeful. I want kids to memorize this list. The way that science of reading experts are using the word is it's more like data. It's a current pulse on how many words you know immediately. Mm-hmm. So a fluent reader is going to have 50 to 90,000 sight words that they have memorized. We want students to get as many sight words under their belt as they possibly can so that they can have that toolkit filled with all of those sight words. So they're not having to sound words out bit by bit when they are reading. So that is our goal, right? We want to build their toolbox full of all of those sight words. Your question is, would it be wise to have both? And absolutely, the answer is yes. You can use those high frequency word lists and you can practice them through sound mapping so that they can eventually become those sight words that they have memorized and students do not need to sound out anymore. Sound mapping is the tool, and the ultimate goal is then going to be those sight words.
Awesome. Awesome. So next we have a question from Shannon, who says, what are some strategies in addition to sound mapping for implementing the science of reading in upper, middle, and secondary classrooms? Great question.
Great question. So Shannon, again, I'm going to go back to phonological awareness. And I know that sounds so weird to suggest that you actually have kids listen for individual sounds and words. That sounds like such a quote unquote baby or a kindergarten skill. But I promise you the impact that it has on students' reading is beyond words. It's so exciting to see because students suddenly have the neural pathways connected in their brain so that they can hear the sounds in words. A lot of times a fifth grader is struggling to sound out the word elephant. And the reason that it's such a struggle is not necessarily because they have holes in their phonics. They might know that PH makes the F sound, but when they're trying to spell elephant, they simply may not hear all of the sounds in that word elephant. They may not hear the PH sound. It might all kind of sound like it's one big chunk, one big blob, and they're not able to separate each individual sound. So practice phonological awareness every single day. I promise it's pure gold.
Love it. So that's back to those 3 tweaks. And it sounds like it's just all like those are the core, really, of science of reading from what I'm hearing. It just all goes back to those 3 tweaks that you shared with us. So thank you so much for that. We have really enjoyed our time with you today. Maria says, thank you for this wonderful and helpful session. Melinda says, thank you. Great strategy. We have IDB that says this is absolutely amazing. And I would agree with all of them. This has been a great session. For those of you that have been asking about where you can find the recordings, our founder of TeacherGoals, Brad, has said, and I want to make sure I share that you can subscribe on the YouTube channel, and all of the previous episodes from seasons 1 and 2 are there. And so that's the link to YouTube. Also, we are on your favorite podcast player platform. So if you listen on Apple or Spotify, Google Podcasts, you can find the TeacherGoals podcast everywhere. So be sure to subscribe and join us. We will be here every Thursday. Season 3 is for 10 whole weeks. So you're going to meet us here every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So once again, I want to just thank you all for joining us. We appreciate that you would take your time to hang out with us. Thank you, Malia, for joining us. This was such a phenomenal episode. I learned so much, and I just love that you brought out the visual aids. Like, they were just so good. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Erica.
Yes, and we will definitely have you back in March. Maybe even bring you back to address some of Stacy's questions about that upper elementary, secondary strategies. We definitely can make that happen. I thought that was a great question and definitely a great topic for a future episode. So we will definitely have you back on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. Have a great night.
Yeah, everyone. And before you go, I'm just going to share with you all once again, next year we are cruising. Woo! And we would love to have you with us. And so I'm going to share the Teach Your Heart Out cruise. Definitely, we would love to see you there. Have a great night, everyone. And we will be back next week.
TeacherGoals and Teach Your Heart Out is sponsoring a 2023 Bahamas cruise open to all educators. Guests such as spouses, family, and friends are also welcome to attend. There is an amazing lineup of speakers, and you can book your PD at sea now by putting down a $200 deposit. Attend the Sail Away Party Thursday, July 6th in Port Canaveral at 6 p.m. in preparation for Cruising Friday. You will return Monday, July 10th at 8 a.m. Scan the QR code now to sign up. You don't want to miss it.